Now, the Cabinet will hold its first meeting of the new Dáil term today with a refund of water charges and a key report on the exaggeration of breath tests by Gardaí on the agenda, among other things. Now, joining us with that story and others making the news this morning are Frank Greaney, courts correspondent with Newstalk and director of the Irish Academy of Public Relations. Very posh title. Ellen Gunning, good morning.
Good morning.
Right, Ellen, let's stop the fun here now, because the circus is back in town, and I don't mean that in a humorous way. There's going to be a very busy slate. Obviously, the budget is probably the thing that they're all concentrating on. But he hasn't got a lot of leeway. We're told he's only got about 300-400 million at most to play around with, so there's not a lot of goodies to be given out, but there's huge problems, most notably the housing crisis, homelessness, Brexit and all that that entails. And then there's, little things bubbling away under the surface like Garda reports and the Charlton reports, etc., etc., etc. And then in the background to all of this, a couple of pieces over the weekend about how the Taoiseach is apparently more worried about his communication strategy, i.e. spin, than all of the above.
I don't think he is. Can I start with the spin bit? I don't think he is. I think he set up this new strategic communications unit, which I actually think is a great idea.
You would, wouldn't you? You're a PR person. Yeah.
I would. But I do for very good reasons. If you look at France, if you look at England, if you look at America, the recent elections have shown there's a huge disconnect between people and government. And the strategic communications, I think if he gets it right with this new unit, I think it's a brilliant idea. Because what you've got is a government information service that effectively talks to people about each policy, piece by piece. As you said, there are so many little things that happen. So they deal with all the little things and explain them. You've got PR people in each of the departments, and their job is to tell you what the Department of the Taoiseach or the Department of Finance is doing. If a strategic communications group could actually sit down and say, this is the big umbrella picture, this is the plan for government, this is the vision, we can't afford to do everything, we can't fix everything, but here are the priorities that we've identified and here's how it all fits together, I think it would make a huge contribution. I don't think it's Leo's spin for Leo, I think it's a spin to try and help people understand that the government has a big vision. OK, Frank,
people in Leicester House telling us the truth, speaking in plain English, what are the chances?
Oh, well, listen, let's hope that Leo's reign will change things somewhat and shake things up somewhat. He's been a breath of fresh air so far in my mind. I know a lot of people have been giving out about seeing our Taoiseach in Lycra going around Phoenix Park and all that, but he has changed the image of the office somewhat. In relation to this communications unit, yeah, let's give it a chance. Let's welcome it. It's the expense of it that I'd like to.
Okay, speaking of expensive, of possibly the biggest governmental or most disastrous governmental expense of the last few years has been Irish Water and all that entails, and now it's coming to its ignominious end with us getting our money back. So it's a little bit of a Christmas bonus for us. It's going to cost them about 170 million, I think. And we'll all have that. We'll get a cheque before Christmas.
Well, they're not hopeful of getting everybody, getting these refunds all paid off before Christmas. But just reading the Irish Times this morning, a government insider apparently saying this is no longer a controversial political issue. Certainly hasn't gone away. Irish Water has been bubbling on for years and years now. But it is of some comfort to the people who did pay the water charge initially that they are going to be refunded and hopefully going into the new year for the sake of this government with an election potentially looming that this will just put it to bed now that people have the money back in their pockets.
We'll get this money back, but somewhere down the road we're going to have to pay out even more because the whole thing's going to have to be fixed, isn't it? I contrast that gesture, and some people might say it's a token gesture, with Pascal Donoghue adamantly saying, I'm not going to reduce VAT for builders. No, I can understand that giving a tax break to builders, it does not fly or sit well with anybody politically. But the fact of the matter is that we need 90-odd thousand houses and we need them in a hurry. Why can't the building sector be treated the same way as tourism? I mean, 13.5% of very little houses being built is no good. 9% of a lot of houses being built would be much better for the Exchequer. So just from a kind of a Maths 101, it would seem to make sense. But
actually, you can understand it from the government's point of view that it will be seen to be very unpopular. People will not approve of it generally. But the issue is housing.
Which is better, people dying on the streets?
Owen Murphy has a huge challenge. He needs to do something about the housing crisis. We've seen people dying on the streets. We've seen a massive increase in the number of people who are homeless. I don't think we have the luxury of the time to try and figure out, if we keep the tax rate at the same rate, how long will it take? The market will sort itself out. I think this is a classic case of needing government intervention and needing it now.
We had Tom Harlan and Peter McVerry, you would think, singing off two very different hymn sheets on that couch yesterday, and they both said, yeah, something like that actually needs to be done. Now, if you've got people who are part of the vested interests in the housing crisis saying something like that, why aren't they not listening in government?
I think it's maybe a throwback to the...
Is it because Fianna Fáil suggested it?
Possibly, and also people may see that it's maybe a road back to where we once were, and we don't want to go back there. The fact that Fianna Fáil came up with this idea may stick in the craw of the government. But there are a lot of other things that can be done too, and it's good that we are talking about this and that people are putting forward ideas and proposals that are being debated. Planning permission, for example, it takes years for these things to come to fruition. A lot of red tape that needs to be cut. Maybe that's another area that we can look at.
OK, just very quickly before we go, we need to talk about the North, because, of course, now that everybody's back in and the Dáil is going and those negotiations are beginning to ramp up a little bit, it actually looks like it's getting worse up above. And Arlene Foster made some conciliatory moves towards Sinn Féin. They were rejected out of hand. And then you've got Jerry Adams throwing spanners in the work, like, well, not spanners in the work. I mean, it is part of their stated agenda and they're entitled to that. But is it helpful for him to turn around and say, oh, yeah, we could have a border poll and reunification within 5 years? I
think Jerry Adams is actually playing a longer game. I think he wants a border poll in 5 years, maybe in 10 years. It is going to come. It's allowed for under the Good Friday Agreement. I think he's speaking to his own people. I think he's speaking to Sinn Féin. He said this as part of a speech where he said that he will be stepping down, which is very interesting. He said that there was a planned generational shift. Yeah, but I think the timing is fascinating, because you have a Sinn Féin Ardèche coming up. He's running for Uachtaráin Sinn Féin. I wonder if this is his signal that it's his last time to run for Uachtaráin Sinn Féin, and that possibly he has his eye on Uachtaráin na hÉireann, and that's his next move, and he wants to put things in place in the meantime. And I think he will steer the ship, whether he's there or not. I think he will steer the ship.
But in the meantime, Frank, we have Brexit, which will be probably the biggest thing the state will face, or has faced so far in its existence. That's got to be dealt with. There is no leadership in the North. The Assembly hasn't sat since January, and there's no sign of it sitting anytime soon, or them even getting into the same room.
I think Simon Coveney summed it up best yesterday when he described it as madness, and he called for some leadership now, and I think that's what is needed. I know Sinn Féin rejected Arlene Foster's suggestion of a parallel process to take place, but maybe that would have been the wise and sensible move. It's what, now 7 months since we had an assembly up north. They've got no voice at the table when it comes to these Brexit negotiations, so it's important now for the likes of Sinn Féin and DUP to start really talking about a compromise to get that assembly again sitting up there, to get some governance up north.
Martin McGuinness was able to work with Ian Paisley, he was able to work with Peter Robinson, people he would have had a poisonous relationship, certainly politically, prior to that. He was able to work with them. He wasn't able to work with Arlene Foster. Now, you know, she's made some moves to soften her stance a little bit. But unless they come to some kind of compromise, they're going to be left out in the cold. And I mean, I heard Peter Hain yesterday making a really sensible suggestion about, OK, the North leaves with the EU, with Britain, but they stay in the customs union. There's a halfway house that can happen. But until the people in the North get together and kind of go, well, actually, this may be the way forward for us. Even suggestions like that, they're not even going to be aired properly.
But the really interesting thing is that this all seems to hang at the moment on this Irish Language Act. But interestingly enough, Sinn Féin are calling for this Irish Language Act on its own, no compromise in advance of it. But the SDLP and the Alliance have backed them on it. So they actually have a majority agreement among those who would be in the Assembly that this should be dealt with as a separate issue. And that should give Arlene Foster an opportunity to say, if that's the majority wish of the Assembly, let's move that way, and then see. They've got to sit down and talk at some stage.
OK, listen, we will be back to this and talking about it, I have no doubt, many times. Thank you both very much indeed. Let us know